All right, everybody. Hello, my name is Paulina Romero, and I oversee the Learning Commons at UNT Dallas. This is a trial run of a pilot program that we are trying to do for the Learning Commons and launching our webinar series. Hi, Nyla. Welcome. You are just in time. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We have about 45 minutes with Zoom, and so I'm going to try and have the entire presentation done in about 30 to 40 minutes, and then leave the time open for us to meet and ask any questions. So I am going to share my screen with you very quickly, and I want y'all to see what I'm looking at. So if you see, maybe not. Okay. So maybe it's not popping up. But I have muted all of the participants for now. And so if y'all have any questions, just please unmute yourself and then feel free to ask. Like I said, I'll have some time at the very end. But for now, we're gonna go ahead and get started. All right, so today's session is on avoiding plagiarism and using APA. APA is one of the citation styles that's mostly used at UNT Dallas, and so we're going to cover that. So just some very basic history about APA. It's kind of the established standard. It's really short for the American Psychological Association, so it was used for sorry, my puppies are here as well. It was used for predominantly psychology, but now it's adopted through higher education for everybody to use. And so it's used because of the organization of content. It's a really easy way for citations to be used, and it's an easy way for citation references to be used as well. So why do we cite? It's to indicate that we've done our research, right? So a lot of times in higher education, we do a lot of research, and we need to make sure that we are letting the authors know or the readers know that we're citing somebody else. We're not stealing their work. So we want to give credit where credit is due, because we would hate for us to put in the work and somebody else to steal our work. And so again, it's to demonstrate that we're using someone else's ideas and to avoid plagiarism and accusations of plagiarism. Towards the end of the webinar, we'll talk about some of the most common ways of plagiarism and how to avoid those. So who uses APA? A lot of the social sciences tend to use it, so psychology, linguistics, economics, criminology. Some business people tend to use it, and now the nursing is using it, but at UNT Dallas, it is the most widely used citation style, so that's why we cover it here. So now we're going to go ahead and jump in straight into some of the guidelines and things like that. So some very important key things for APA. APA papers, regardless of what you're writing, if your faculty asks you to do an APA paper, it's always going to be double spaced. You are always going to want to have 1-inch margins on either side and top to bottom, so make sure that you check that as soon as you get started. And then you want to make sure that you use 12-point font, and it is Times New Roman. Sometimes it's okay to use the default Calibri, but Times New Roman tends to look a lot cleaner. Some faculty require a header, and so I'm going to show you an example of a running head, but basically a running head is what appears at the very top of the paper, and it appears at the top of every page. So it's a very shortened version of your paper's title. It usually can't exceed about 50 characters, so you want to keep it nice and short, particularly if you have a very long title. And so here on the screen, if we see, we've got, this is an example of it. Obviously, we're not going to have APA template. We're going to put the title of our paper. But on the first page, as you notice, we have the words running head. Running head will always appear on the first page, on the cover page. followed by your title in all caps. And then on the second page, it's just your title. So please notice the difference between the first page that says running head, and that does not count towards your 50 letters. And then the second page, and the second page is what's going to be subsequent for the rest. You'll see that throughout the rest of the paper. So some major paper sections, you'll always have a title page. Some faculty don't require a title page or an abstract, but it's usually a good idea to kind of start getting in the habit of it, particularly if you're a graduate student or you're thinking about graduate school. But if you're wondering whether or not you need to have an abstract or a title page, check with your faculty members. So a title page will always be the very first thing. On the second page, you might have an abstract, and we'll talk about what goes into that abstract. Then you've got the rest of the paper, and your very last pages will always be your references. So those are the main 4 sections of an APA paper. So let's talk about a little bit of this title page, right? So again, here we see that running head. We've got, again, on the first page, we'll always see the words running head followed by the title. In this case, it's the longer title. It's the literary styles of Ray Bradbury in the 20th century. But remember, we shorten it for the running head. So literary styles of Ray Bradbury, a nice general summary of what that title is. And that comes at the very first line. Then we want to have the author's name, and that's typically your name if you're the student and you're writing it. And finally, you'll have your institution. So in this case, it'll always be UNT Dallas. Sometimes the faculty require that you put their name and their class. So if that's the case, you would put that after the university, and just check with your faculty to make sure that that's something that they want. So the tricky abstract, this is something that we get a lot of questions about in the Writing Center. And again, some professors don't require an abstract. So if they're not going to require it, don't stress about it. It might be good practice, but if you don't have to do it, don't do it. So on the first line of the abstract page, you'll always center the word abstract just like you would if it were a title. No bold, no formatting, no italics, no nothing, just simple abstract. And then the next line is where you actually start writing your concise summary. So an abstract is actually a very brief summary of what your paper is going to be about. It's like a glimpse. If somebody couldn't read your paper, but they wanted to know what your paper was about, they would read this quick abstract in 1 to 2 minutes. So it includes your research topic, your research questions that you might be answering. If you're doing a research study, so who are the participants? Who did you review? Methods, was it qualitative, quantitative? And some of these may or may not be applicable to your particular paper. So you can kind of mold these out, but this is the traditional sense of what an abstract looks like. If you conducted a study, what were the results, right? Very briefly, one line, what were the results? What type of data analysis did you use? And then any conclusions. So based on your research, what conclusions can you draw? And so your abstract should be a single paragraph, double spaced again, and it should be about 150 to 250 words, so short and sweet. Another thing, you may also want to list keywords in your paper, in your abstract. So this is kind of a bigger deal when you become a graduate student, or maybe if you've ever done a search on Google and you kind of want to pop up things that have your keywords, right? So maybe I'm looking for mental health in men in a certain age. So if those are keywords for your paper, you might want to list them out and just type out the words keywords and then list them with commas in between. So this is an example of an abstract. Again, we see our running head, right? The shortened title. We've got the word abstract, and then we write in one paragraph what the summary is. This is just an example, so it's not really an abstract. And then at the very bottom, we see the keywords, right? If we had any keywords, that's where we would list them. All right, so now let's talk about the reference page. The reference page is usually what kind of trips students up the most, and it's usually that very last page that comes at the paper. It's where we have to cite out all of the research, all the things that we read, and all the things that we used within our research paper. So it tends to be the last page. It is a separate page. So even if the last page of your paper only has a couple lines, you do want to start a whole new fresh page. You'll start the whole page off with the word reference at the very top, just like we did our abstract. And this is where we're going to provide the full documentation or the entire citation for each article or each website or blog or video that we watched. And so entries tend to be more than one line, so make sure that you use the hanging indent within your paper. And so if you're wondering what that is, if you notice in this example down here, we've got, we start with the author's last name, McGonagall, but then we see on the second and the third lines that they're kind of slightly to the right. So that's what we mean by hanging indent. If you have any trouble with hanging indents, just come by the Writing Center and we can walk you through that. So this is an example of what a reference page would look like, right? We have, again, our title. I know you're probably getting sick of me saying that, but we've got the title. Excuse me. Puppies! And then we've got the reference page right there. So we've got that middle, that key thing. What is this thing that we're talking about? It's the references. And we have all of our references. Now, please notice on your reference page, all of your references will be in alphabetical order. So we're going to start with A's, B's, and go through Z's. If you have an author that is the same author using the same last name, if there's multiple authors, then you will list it out by the second name of the author. Or if it's the same author and you're using and it's just listed out, but then you would list it out by year. So for example, if we had Connor S and he had written an entire paper by himself, then the Connor S by himself would come before the one with all of the other authors. Now, if we just had multiple papers by Connor S, but one of them was written in 2009 and the other one was written in 2010, the one that was the first one that came out, so the earliest, 2009, would be at the top. And I'll pull up some examples as well of some reference pages. So y'all can see, but this is, the Writing Center does offer an entire, we help with APA, and so we can break it down for you based on what type of resource you're using, right? So depending on if you're using periodicals, aren't used that often, but if you're using books, we're mostly using electronic sources now, and so there is a very particular way that you have to cite these online resources. And so we offer a handout within the Writing Center. If you're not able to come up and grab one, I'm going to give you all my email address and just shoot me an email and I can send it to you. Another really great resource is this Purdue OWL Online. So I just Googled Purdue OWL APA. And it's usually the first thing that comes up. This is a wonderful, wonderful free resource that you can access at any point in time. And it's actually the #1 resource for APA because they just break everything down so simply and it's so easy to use. So if you forget everything that we talk about today, go to Purdue OWL and they run through, you know, that title page, that running page, the abstract, things like that. So it's all listed out here. And then on the left-hand side, if you have particular questions, let's say you're using a particular electronic resource and you're not quite sure how to list that because you just can't find that anywhere, this website will be able to break it down for you. So for example, are we using an online periodical? So that's usually like a journal, right? Or if we are using articles with DOI. So DOI is something that pops up very frequently now. And so it's the equivalent to, like us old folks would say, the call number at a library. And so this is just the identification number now. That's the easier way for papers and articles to be located. So it depends on what your faculty member wants and whether or not your citation that you use has a DOI. And so if you've got questions about that, Purdue OWL is a great, great, great resource to use. And it just kind of goes down the line, right, of things that you may or may not use. They update it quite frequently, so things like Kindle books, things that, you know, are starting to appear in technology will come up on the site. But this is one of the #1 resources we recommend within the Writing Center. All right, so now let's talk about the paper, right? Again, the paper should be double spaced with no extra spaces between paragraphs. So just make sure you're not going to hit a second enter between paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. Just one enter and keep on writing. There should only be a single, the equivalent to a double space in each paragraph. It should or could contain statistics, quotes, and references. References are very important, as well as your own ideas. And it always depends on what type of paper you're writing, right? So later this semester, we'll talk about the differences between a research paper versus a literature review. And so depending on that will mean how much of my ideas do I need in versus how much of a summary do I need in about the article that I wrote and things like that. But the most important things and things that we hear a lot from faculty is that you must use the correct citations. So we see a lot of students that get docked for incorrect citation use. And so if you've got questions, again, use that Purdue OWL. If you can't come to the Writing Center, if you can, come see us. Bring your papers so that we can double check to make sure that we are correct in what we're telling you, and we'll get you all squared up. So in-text citations, the difference between in-text citations and a reference page are very, very different. So think of the in-text citation as a shortened version of that citation, right? We just want to give a quick and dirty of who said it, when they said it, and potentially, if we're pulling a direct quote, where to find it. And so we just kind of give that first and last name, or that last name, I'm sorry, the year, and potentially a page number. And so if your faculty member or your reader says, well, I want to read more about that research article that they read, then they can go back to your reference page and pull up the entire article. But for this, you probably, like I said, you really just want to include the author's name, the year, and potentially the page number, but definitely the author and the year. In-text citations occur either at the end of the quote or if you paraphrase, and we'll talk about what a paraphrase is, but parenthetical citations is basically a shortened version of the information on your reference page put into parentheses. And so, for example, this is when we say this line, Smith, 2009, points out that the variety of cases makes exact determination of cause more difficult. So we didn't pull the entire quote or the entire sentence, but we did find it very important to pull out those exact words. And so that is what we consider a parenthetical citation. When we're pulling certain exact words, we still have to put those in quotation marks, and we go from there. So a few notes. Again, you only will use a page number if you are citing something directly, if you're quoting something directly, or using 2 or 3 or more words that are the exact same than from the article that you saw. If not, you will likely just use the author's last name or the authors if there's multiple, and the year. If you are paraphrasing, which means that you're kind of condensing a quote or you're condensing an idea taken from your research and putting it into your own words, you do not need a parenthetical citation, so you don't need this page number in parentheses, especially if you've already mentioned the author's name at the beginning of the sentence, right? So if we are starting the sentence with the author's name, in this case, Smith, you don't need the parenthetical citation at the end. Now, if we just said, the research points out that the variety of cases makes exact determination of causes more difficult, then we would need to put the parenthetical citation at the end. We do need the author's name followed by a comma and then the year. At all points in time, whether we're paraphrasing or you know, doing pulling a direct quote or part of a quote, the author's name and the year needs to be there. And then another key point, as we see at the bottom, make sure that you always punctuate outside your parentheses. So if you're putting Smith in the year or the last name in the year at the very end, the period always goes outside of the quotation or the parentheses. All right, so what is plagiarism? We get this question a lot, and it's kind of it's a tricky thing, right? But basically, the way I break it down for students, it's when we copy or borrow or sometimes even steal unintentionally or intentionally somebody else's works and somebody else's ideas. In the context of higher education and in college, this is a serious offense. We take this very seriously. The Dean of Students take this very seriously, and your faculty members do as well, because it's very important to give credit where credit is due. Because if you as a scholar produce something, you would want somebody to give you credit for the hard work you did. Plagiarism is actually illegal. So according to the US law, stealing intellectual property, which is just, you know, somebody's thoughts and things like that, is essentially stealing somebody's original inventions. And so it does make it illegal, and it does come with fines and things like that. But in the sense of UNT Dallas, it is very important because there are very serious fines, or they're very serious consequences. You can fail a class, you can fail a paper, and if this is a repeat offense, you might even get kicked out. So plagiarism is a big deal. So just make sure, that's why citation is so important. Don't mean to scare you. If you make an incorrect citation, you accidentally borrow someone's idea, or you don't get a citation quite right, we know you have the best intentions, but as long as you aren't, you know, doing it intentionally, you should be okay. All of the following are considered plagiarism, and so some people aren't aware of, you know, what is plagiarism and what doesn't. So turning in someone else's work as your own, even if it's a classmate or somebody that graduated before you, or somebody at a different institution, does constitute as plagiarism. And there are various websites that sometimes our faculty use that recognize if it's your paper's already been submitted, then they're going to pull it, and it's going to say, oh, somebody else already wrote it, and so you could get dinged for that. Copying words or ideas from someone else without giving them credit, again, so that's why it's really important to list out the name and give credit where credit is due. Failing to put quotation or quotation marks, again, if we're pulling out maybe 2 or 3 more words, exact words than what was listed in the research, we definitely need to put those in quotation marks just to be on the safe side. If you're giving incorrect information about the source of a quotation, most of the times this happens accidentally. If it happens accidentally, it's not a big deal. But if you purposely give incorrect information, then that can definitely get you in lots of trouble. Changing words but copying the sentence structure of a source without giving credit. So even if you say, okay, well, I rewrote a sentence and I used fancier words, or I used different words, if it pretty much is still conveying the same idea, it might constitute as plagiarism. So make sure that you are trying, when you're paraphrasing or you're trying to summarize what was in your research, make sure that you really think about it in a way that you would say it. You as a person, or you as the student might, you know, what does it mean to you? And can you regurgitate that or put it into words in an academic way as well? And then another thing is turning in your own work. So if you've written a paper for another class and you want to reuse it, you can actually commit plagiarism against yourself. Ironically, if you are going to pull quotes or paragraphs, or, you know, something else from another paper that you've already written, make sure you cite yourself and give yourself credit where credit is due. So let's talk about the top 10 types of plagiarism and how to avoid them. So cloning, this is submitting somebody else's work word for word and passing it off as your own. And maybe all you do, you know, is copy paste from the internet, put in your own title page, put in your word. Definitely a no-no, right? And so how do we avoid that? Preparing our papers ahead of time. Sometimes it's we tend to clone, or we see students cloning papers because they've run out of time. So make sure that you start your papers or start doing research, which is probably the lengthiest thing that takes the longest, and start that early enough. The Control-C, right? So we tend to hit Control, copy, and then paste everything out without really significantly altering it or putting in our own thoughts, or even giving them credit. So make sure you're very, very careful when you kind of do that Control-C, or you do the right-click, copy, and then paste it into your paper. Make sure that you're trying to put that into your own words and give credit where credit is due. find, replace. So I know I was guilty of this when I was in college, and it's a very easy thing to do, but sometimes when we're running out of ideas or we're just tired and we say, I don't want to rewrite this entire sentence, but I am going to rewrite this word, right? Maybe I can find a synonym or like a really super fancy word for a couple of these words that are in the sentence. I'll change them up, and then it's not plagiarism. It actually still is. So even if you're just replacing things, but not actually citing them, and again, putting in your own areas, can also be plagiarism. Remix. So something that we see is sometimes students can take pieces of quotes from different areas and put them together. And so we have this idea that, well, it's not really plagiarism if I am not really copying the entire sentence. Maybe I'm copying like 3 words here and 3 words here and a couple words here. And then I really like this idea, and then I'm just going to mesh it all up together. Again, if it's still not your own work and you're kind of borrowing from somebody else, make sure you just cite it. The best thing is if you're going to do that and you know you're borrowing more than a couple words, and you're maybe struggling on how to say something but the author said it best, put those quotation marks, put in that the parenthetical citation, what page did you get it from, and list out that author name in that year, just to be on the safe side. Recycling. So again, borrowing your own work from earlier can also be plagiarism. Make sure that if you are going to recycle, you add something new. As you're learning and as you're taking your classes, you're probably going to learn more, and so you might be able to look at a paper or something that you wrote and say, I bet I could say that differently, or now I have more information to add. And so just be careful about recycling your own work. Hybrid. So this is when we combine some perfectly cited sources with directly copied uncited material to make it sound like it's original, right? So maybe we have a citation but we take it off of Wikipedia, and we know our faculty members shun Wikipedia, and we're like, but I just don't have time. Putting a false citation and making it sound like it's an original, even if it's copied from something else, is still considered plagiarism. The 404 error. So this includes citations to non-existent sources or uses of inaccurate sources. So basically this is when, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, right? When we're clicking along the internet and then we get to a point where we click on something and it takes us to this error page and says, this page does not exist. So making sure that the web pages that you're linking to are active is very important, because if we can't trace it, then your faculty members might consider that as plagiarism. Mash up again, so we're taking blocks of copied material from different sources. So last time when we talked about the remix, it was taking bits and pieces from the same paper, but we've seen before where students say, well, I'm going to make a whole sentence or a whole paragraph copying, taking or borrowing from different articles, and no one will know. Again, if we run it through one of those like turnitin.com, it picks up on all of that. So regardless, make sure you're citing and avoiding that plagiarism. Number 9, aggregator. So paper is almost entirely composed of sources. And so sometimes we see that students kind of get a little bit nervous, right? Because they're like, I don't want to get in trouble for plagiarism. I need to make a good grade. So I'm just going to cite everything because I'm not quite sure if this is my own idea or if this is coming from somebody else. Try to avoid that as well. This is what's really tricky about plagiarism, right? It's kind of like this in between of like, how much is too much, but how much is not enough? So to avoid number 9, you really just want to make sure that you are using sources to support your argument or whatever point you're trying to make. Or if you're pulling a source or a quote, you want to, maybe you have to explain what that means to you or why that's relevant to your course or to whatever you're studying. So including your own ideas, including your own interpretation and understanding of those sources is going to help avoid a lot of these things. And number 10, this is kind of a new one, right? The retweet. It's kind of the least serious kind of plagiarism, but it's still not recommended. So you've got the proper citation. Maybe you've got the right citation, but you rely too closely on the text original wordings at the expense of the original work, right? So again, this is kind of the I'm not sure if I'm saying this right. Plus, I kind of like the way they said it, and it's 11 o'clock, and my paper's due at midnight, so I'm just gonna move a few words here or there, but it really does look very similar to the article. It's, again, because you're still including that proper citation, you might be able to get by, but you might also get dogged for not including your own thoughts. So just kind of keep all of that in mind as we're talking about citations. So when in doubt, cite, right? That's kind of the moral of the story. So in most cases of plagiarism, it can be avoided, just making sure that we have the correct citations either embedded within the paper, you know, stating those last names in that year, and if we're taking direct quotes or, you know, two to three or more words that are exactly the same as a paper, including those parenthetical citations at the end, which is just P for page number, followed by the page number. So when in doubt, just throw in that citation. But if you realize that you're in doubt quite frequently and you're starting to see a lot of citations throughout your paper, maybe it's time to come into the Writing Center, or maybe it's time to stop and say, okay, at what point in time do I need to embed my own words and my own thoughts to make this work? That is it. That's all I have for you right now. So what I will do at this point is open it up to questions. So feel free to unmute yourself. You can click on the unmute button, or you can click on the microphone, and if you've got questions, I'm open to questions. I'll open the chat as well. I think there is a chat feature, so if students have any questions and they'd rather not unmute themselves, feel free to type it in. I'm sorry, my puppies are barking. Okay, so I'm still going to leave it open for questions, but what I would like to do at this point in time is also bring up a couple of our resources that we have in the Writing Center. Puppies! So these will be available. We are launching our new website hopefully within this next semester. And so some of the top 10 APA tips, this was put together by our tutors who work a lot with our students, and these are the types of errors that we see quite frequently. So commas, one big question we have is, where do commas go? And commas tend to go, if you're pulling a direct quote, the comma is going to go inside of the quotation mark, right? So a direct quote will write out the quote, but that comma always, 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 always goes inside the quotation marks. In-text citations, if they contain the author, year, and the page number is always preceded just simply by the letter P, right? So here's an example of a direct quote that we pulled out. So we've got the quote. And in this case, there is no comma, right? So the punctuation does not go inside the quotation. It's actually going to go at the end. But if we're looking at this citation, we've got the author's name, Rowling. We've got the year. Each one is followed by a comma. And then the page number is it's simply delineated by P, period, and then the number. So it's not going to be PG, period. It's just going to be P, period, followed by the page number, and then the period. Paraphrasing citation. So I know we talked a lot about that during the presentation. So paraphrasing still requires an in-text citation, even if we're putting it in our own words, right? So if we're still using somewhat of somebody else's thoughts, then we need to put that. In this case, the author is Laverne, and the year is 1990. And so we've got, since we didn't list out, how we started with Laverne states that Rowling said success felt different than she thought, then that citation would look like this. Laverne, followed by the year, said that Rowling said, right? But because, and then in that case, we wouldn't need the second part. We've already got the author's last name and the year. But if we're not starting the sentence, or we're not including the author's name within the sentence, that's when that citation comes in at the end, and we are going to use those parentheses. Again, remember that the period will always come at the end of the parentheses. So consider the parentheses the very last thing of the sentence, and the period will come at the end of it. Running head, making sure that the word running head, I know this is a weird one, but the words running head need to be on that first page, and then they won't be on the subsequent pages, but running head will be on there. Those are the only two words that are going to be in upper and lowercase, and then the rest of your title is going to be in all caps. So again, if we want to see an example of that, and if you're having trouble setting your running head, this is an example of a handout that we have that walks you through how, step by step, how to do that running head, right? Because sometimes it can be very difficult to get word to work. But remember, in our example paper that we've seen, this is what your paper would look like. The running head would come on your cover page. Again, we have the words running head, and then the shortened title. And then the subsequent pages would only have the shorter version of your title, okay? Another one that we get a lot is the block quotes. So somebody says, I really want to include this entire quote. How do I do that? So if a quote is longer than 40 words, then it actually is going to require its own paragraph. So you'll kind of cite it completely different. It won't be within that your same paragraph. You'll start a whole new paragraph. It'll be indented once, so you'll just hit the tab button once from that new line, and then you'll start writing. It'll still be double spaced, and you'll still have the in-text citation at the very end. But if a quote is longer than 40 words, go ahead and put it in its own paragraph. And then once you're done with that paragraph, you can resume typing to that far left. You won't have to start a new paragraph. You'll just continue typing as was normal. We get a lot of questions about this et al., right? So when there are more than 6 authors in a paper, the in-text citation does include the first author's last name followed by et al. Now, the caveat to this is if you're using a resource that has more than 6 authors, the first time you write out the in-text citation within the paper, you will have to list out all 6, 7, 8, 9 authors by their last name, alphabetically or however they appear within your paper, followed by the year. After you've done that once within your paper, you only have to list that out once, then you can use et al. And so et al is basically just kind of it's like an etc., or it includes everybody. And so if you're using that, it'll be the shorter rate. You'll always still list out the first name of the first author that appears. Then you'll have et al in all lower caps. You'll have a period after the word all, and then a comma. There's no space between the period or the comma, and then you'll put out the year. So again, author's last name, the last name of the first author, et al, period, comma, followed by the year. For your reference page, you do have to actually put out the word reference. I know that's super annoying, but you do want to put out the word reference. So again, if we go back to our page, our example paper, we've finished our paper. It's our last page. We start a whole new page. We still have our running head. We still have that title, but now we list out this new section and we actually write out the word reference, and then we list out all of our references. So make sure that your reference page does start with the word reference. Book titles are italicized. So in our example of Harry Potter, the title of the book is italicized. The journal citations, when citing a journal, italicize the journal volume number, not the issue number. So a lot of people ask, what is the difference? Usually the way you can tell that within an article is there's a little number, and then sometimes there's another number within the parentheses. So the number that's italicized, or the number that's not in parentheses, is usually the volume number, and then comes the issue number. Now notice here again, another big thing, volume number is italicized, issue number is not, and there's no space between the volume number and the issue number. That's really weird, I know, but if you do have both, and sometimes you'll only have the volume number. If you only have the volume number, you don't have to worry about the issue number. But this isn't the case that maybe it's like volume 9 of a journal, but they've made like 15 different publications within that same volume. And so that's why they put the issue number. But again, volume number is italicized, issue number is not. Issue number is within parentheses, and there is no space between volume number and issue number. And then the last thing, the extra lines that we talked about, right? So make sure that you don't include any extra spacing. So that might include accidentally hitting the enter button, and then it goes, you kind of add in an extra space. Just make sure that throughout that whole paper, it looks even. You can usually tell the difference between just a double spaced paper and an extra line, right? So if you're wondering what that looks like, let's kind of go back up here. So if we look at, let's look at this. This is a really good example of a quote, a block quote that we talked about. So we've got our paragraph. There is no extra space between this and the block quote, but we notice the block quote is indented. This is still double spaced. And then when we continue with the paragraph, this is also double spaced. Now, how do you know if there's an extra space? It would look something like that. So just making sure that there's only one double space there is good. And same thing if you're including titles or you're breaking up your paper. So if, oh my goodness. So that's just a little timer telling me that our time is up. So if we notice here, we've got we've got the conclusion of a paragraph, and then we've got the title or a subtitle there. There is no extra space. Again, what would it look like with a space? It would look something like that. And sometimes I'm guilty of doing that too, because I have to meet a page limit. I really kind of want to stretch it out to that last page, make sure that I get, the 12 or 15 or 20 pages that my faculty members are asking for. But you can get points deducted, so just be aware of that. All right, that is it. That's all I have for you. So please, if you've got any other questions, feel free to contact the Writing Center. The easiest way to get in touch with us is by emailing us. It's Learning Commons, all one word, learningcommons@untdallas.edu. Again, learning, learningcommons@untdallas.edu. I've got a list of the attendees that came, so I will try and send out a lot of these resources to you. If you do not get an email from me, please email us at that Learning Commons email. Let me know that you attended the webinar and you want some of these extra handouts. And if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, let us know. Thanks again so much for joining me. I hope this was helpful. If you have any feedback, let me know. Again, this was kind of our pilot program. This is kind of the first one we've ever done. So I know there is room for improvement, but just let us know how we did. We do have 2 other upcoming ones throughout the semester. We'll send out email blasts to the students again and give y'all plenty of time. We are recording this session, so we hope to post it on our website and post it on our social media so you all have access to it again and again. But join us the next one. I think we'll be on writing a research paper, writing an A+ research paper, and then the last one is going to be on literature reviews. Thank you so much. Y'all have a good night.